Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to talk about how to complete your project, your Tunisian crochet project. Uh, I will talk about how you can bind off your last rows. Here are two swatches I made. Use two different ways of binding off. In this one I used the slip stitch method, so you can see that this top row there's it's a row of slip stitches, and in this one I used single crochet stitches. So I'm going to show you how to do both, and I will talk about which ones, the pros and cons of both. So I have a swatch here that I made of simple stitches, and I'm going to do the slip stitch method first. So if you want to know how to make simple stitches, Tunisian simple stitches, I have a tutorial for that. You can find a link to my tutorials in the description below. So this the last row is made almost the same way as any other row, except that you don't leave your loops on the hook. You keep removing them as you go. So for the first one I'm going to make a simple stitch, and because I'm using the slip stitch method, I'm going to just slip this through the previous loop. Then I'm going to do this again for the next one, make a simple stitch, and instead of leaving this on the hook, I'm going to pull it through the previous loop. So I'm going to do this throughout the row, and just make sure that my stitches, my slip stitches are loose, otherwise one end of my project becomes narrower than the other, and I don't want that. So to maintain that the shape of my project, I have to make sure that my stitches are loose enough, not too loose, but just enough to maintain that shape. So the last stitch is made again in the same way, but just go ahead and so you can see that, I made the slip stitch in the last stitch here, and you can see that I have this row of slip stitches nice and clean at the top, and that's how you make the last row with slip stitches. Now I'm going to do the same thing with single crochet stitches, and I'll show you how. So here I am at the beginning, and I'm going to pick up the first stitch, and instead of just slipping it through, I'm going to yarn over and pull through both. So that makes a single crochet stitch, a regular single crochet stitch. So I'm going to do that throughout all the way till the end of the row. So you don't leave any loops on the hook, you just keep moving them out. Well, just keep working them, so you just have one in the end. So that is how it looks with single crochet. So let's just go over how they look. So this one, the first one is the one with slip stitches, and the second one with single crochet stitches. I really like the first one because it's very clean. The row ends where the previous row ends, so there's no extra line, whereas if you see in this one, you can see that extra line of single crochet stitches. But I have seen that more often than not I end up using the single crochet method to bind off my last row. That is mostly because whenever I use the slip stitch method, I don't get the tension right. It's either too loose or too tight, and that messes up the shape of my project. With single crochet project, with the single crochet row, I usually get it right. The tension is the exact same as the rest of the rows, and I don't have to worry about how loose or how tight I'm making them. I just do it as I would normally, and it works out just fine. So you can pick whichever method you'd like. It will look slightly different because you can definitely see an extra row of single crochet stitches here, and both of them will work out. In terms of the technique, just have to figure out which one looks better for you. Another thing to note here is that while making your last row, you need to, because this was a single crochet swatch, I was just making it like, I'm sorry, it was a Tunisian simple stitch swatch. I was making simple stitches, but if it were any other stitch, like if it were a rib stitch, so I would insert my hook as I would normally to make a rib stitch. Like I would make a simple stitch here, and then I would make a twisted stitch here, and the only difference would be that I would not leave all the loops on my hook. I would just keep working them either using a slip stitch or a single crochet, and that is mostly because your last row is defined by what you make. So this row before the single crochet is defined by what I did at the top in the last row. So that is why you need to make sure that you make your last row such that the previous row stitches are defined as they should be. So if the pattern calls for the last row to be rib stitches, then you will have to insert your hook such that you were making rib stitches, only that you would work your the loops on the hook differently. That's about it for how to bind off. If you have any questions, please leave me a message.